Hello everyone, welcome to Okasti Media. I'm Takulla Guyya Sadinsa. Today I have distinguished guest, Dr. Tsaggaye Ararsa from Melbourne, Australia. Thank you for your service, commitment and determination serving our community and the general public in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Tsaggaye, our agenda for the day is the war on Oromia and it is in the game in Ethiopia. There is a war raging in Ethiopia. The war in Oromia has been going on for about 3 years now. Give us a context. Where are we now?
Well, it is true, yes. Since 1919, there is a war launched by Abiy Ahmed's regime on Oromia. We believe that it is an Oromo-wide war, but it was waged under the pretext that the regime wants to disarm the breakaway OLF group, Oromo Liberation Army. And since then, the Oromia region, especially some of the western regions, the southern regions, and the central regions, have been completely in a devastating war by the Ethiopian military and the Oromia Special Forces. And on the border areas recently, by the Amhara National Regional State Special Forces and their militia and vigilante group called Fano. Apart from that, the Wollo zone, the Wollo Oromo zone of the Amhara region has also been in a continuing war since 2018, actually, since even before that. It was a war of ethnic cleansing to cleanse the region of all Oromo presence. And at the political level and at the cultural level, the entire Ethiopian media establishment and the political class has been doing a hate propaganda, a hate speech against the Oromo. According to the politicians that are affiliates to Abiy Ahmed, those of them especially working under the banner of Ethiopian Citizens for Social Justice, IZEMA, and the Amhara National Movement, ABN, and some of the others, including the Amhara Region's Prosperity Party, have had this project, short-term, long-term project of doing three things. First, eliminate all Oromo nationalists, whether they be intellectuals, businessmen and women, business leaders, religious leaders, musical icons, artists, and so on and so forth. All opinion leaders, thinkers, and financiers, and all of them were subjected to targeted assassination and complete elimination. And the second is the attack on the Oromia regional state. It has been clear that among the Ethiopianist political class, the project of this era, the project of Abiy Ahmed's regime, is to break up the region and the Oromia region and divide it into different other provinces, thereby ending the history of federal self-governance that has been in place according to the Ethiopian constitution since 1995. Now, the third component of their project of the war on Oromia is eradication of Oromo identity, Oromumma, Oromo-ness. And having declared this through their media outlets, ISAT, Ethio Media, all sorts of Ethiopianist media platforms, 360 and on, and those FM radios in the country, including Ahadu Media, etc. They have targeted the Oromo public in this way, kill the Oromo nationalists, break up the Oromia region, and eradicate Oromumma, Oromo identity, Oromo language, and so on and so forth. It has become clear that being an Oromo in Ethiopia today is actually far more securitized than it was before. It has always been securitized because for most Ethiopianists to be an Oromo or to be a member of any of the groups other than the Abyssinian core, if you are a Somali or a Sidama or an Oromo or a Walaita, etc., you, as the other of the state, are a cause of security threat to the state. The consequence of that is that their identity itself is therefore securitized. And at this point in time, the media establishment, the security establishment, the military, the police force, the intelligence, all of them have securitized Oromo identity. And because of this, the war has been a comprehensive one. At the same time, there has been activities undertaken by Abiy Ahmed's regime to displace Oromos further by settling Amhara settlers from the region and dispersing them as squatters, especially in territories around the Finfinne city, which is also known as Addis Ababa. So there was a sustained war since 2019, but at this point in time, the war has become more confrontational because they basically waged a war on the civilian population under the pretext to humiliate, to silence the Oromo public, to eliminate the Kero Oromo's protest movement that actually brought about the change. And now Kero Oromo has been called all sorts of names. The leaders have been assassinated, and some of them are co-opted, some of them are coerced out of the public life. And all that was part of the bigger project of attacking Oromo nationalists, breaking up the region, undoing the federal system, and eradicating Oromo identity. But that war became very grave when the Ethiopian military actually invaded Western Oromia in 2019. Beginning from 2019, network was completely disrupted. Transport communication was stopped, interrupted, and people have had no network, no financial services, no electricity, no other social services. In various places, the schools have stopped working. Government offices, bureaucratic institutions had stopped working. People have been starving for 3-6 months, for 4 months at a time, and then intermittently afterwards. For 4 months, non-stop, there was no connection whatsoever with other parts of the country. And it was a complete emergency rule, and it was the military that was basically raiding every corner of the area, and you had almost one soldier in front of every household at some point in the Wolaga region. That was 2019. At the same time, a similar war effort was conducted. They call it a law enforcement effort in the southern parts of Oromia, which is the Guji zone and the Borana zone. In those places, extraordinary things have happened, and Human Rights Watch is on record, Amnesty is on record, of the gruesome human rights violations and the atrocities committed there. In the Guji zone, about 1,000 huts have been burned down, in some of them while people are alive. Harvests were burned down. Oromo farmers were disallowed from farming, and this has happened also in Wolaga. And at this point in time, there is a huge humanitarian crisis, forcing us to beg for food in order to reach some of the millions in the southern parts of Oromia. Added to that is there is a drought now, especially in Borana. Until last week, they had never had a rain in quite a while. And both the natural environment, the cattle and human beings have been exposed to that famine, that drought and famine that followed from the drought. And this is in addition to and exacerbating what humanitarian crisis that the government has created by making war on the regions. The idea was to eliminate what they call OLF Shene, to eliminate the Oromo Liberation Army from that area. Just a little before that, there was a political party decision within the Prosperity Party of Oromia where they actually endorsed a scorched earth policy in attacking Oromia. They said, if you want to eliminate the Oromo Liberation Army, then you have to actually drain the source being the Oromo public. And so they said, we are going to have an all-out war against them. And in that process, they did all sorts of things. They, as I said, they burned villages, houses. Some towns are now have been completely razed down by fire, and there are no huts.
I want to quote what you have said earlier, and the Oromia Prosperity, the Prosperity Party Oromia branch General Secretary Mr. Fikadu Tesama has said during the Oromia State House of Representatives session, he literally said that to eradicate the fish, the best way is drying out the ocean. This is literally, he said that the Oromo Liberation Army is hiding in the general public, in the Oromo, and the best way to destroy the Oromo Liberation Army is killing the Oromo people. That's what he has said literally in the House of Representatives regular session.
Yes. And that's basically their policy. It has been a documented policy. And Fikadu Tesema, as a spokesperson of the Prosperity Party, Oromia Prosperity Party, was public. It was being televised when this was reported in the Chafe Oromia, the regional House of Representatives, where he said, if you want to kill the fish, then drain the river, drain the water. And that policy is what caused the affront on civilians everywhere. Now, I was just trying to recollect the things that were done, and some of them are reported only partially by the Human Rights Watch in 2019 and 2020 and Amnesty International. So an entire set of villages have been burned down. Farms have been burned down, and at times huts with humans in them, with people living in them, were set on fire, and the Ethiopian soldiers and the Oromia police, the special police forces, were actually taking selfies while people are burning inside the houses that they have set on fire. Number two, they have been raping children and women as a way of humiliating the public and terrorizing the public. It was not just the women's body now that is under attack. It was male children that were raped. A child of 9 has been gang raped by 23 Oromo Special Forces, Oromia Special Forces. And this has been a pattern, not just in Guji zone, not just in Borana zone. It also happened in Wallaga. In Wallaga means there are 4 zones there, and almost invariably in all of them, this has been a pattern. The idea is we have to terrorize these people into submission. If they don't stop supporting the Oromo Liberation Army, this is what we do. And once we terrorize the people, once the people will not support the OLA, then the Oromo Liberation Army, then of course the OLA will be standing naked and we can eliminate them. That was the idea, and it has been prosecuted as such until today. And it goes on and on. At this time, as we speak, just last week in Parliament, the president of the Oromia regional state said, we're going to eliminate the Oromo Liberation Army in 1 month. So there is a renewed declaration of war on Oromos. As if that's not enough, just last week, Abiy Ahmed himself, as the leader of the Prosperity Party of the country, he was giving directions to the newly elected Central Committee members and Executive Committee members. And in that meeting, he actually said that the OLA is not just the enemy of the Oromo people and the Oromia region. The OLA is the enemy of everyone in Ethiopia. And therefore, everyone, whether it is Amhara or Tigray or Sidama, Prosperity Party should be coming together to fight against the Oromo Liberation Army, which basically means he is inviting other forces to come into Oromia and attack the Oromo public in order to eliminate the Oromo Liberation Army. So the war has been going on for a long time. And in Wulaga, the same has happened in central areas, in northern Shoa, in southwest Shoa, in all these places. The war is raging. Before, it was almost a unilateral action, the Ethiopian military forcing itself upon the civilians and trying to hunt down what they called is OLF Shani, which is the Oromo Liberation Army. But at a later point in time, the OLF, the OLA, they regrouped and started to be a formidable defense because the public had no other defense other than them, and they stood their ground, and they have now repulsed the Ethiopian army and almost occupied 3/4 of the territorial, the rural towns, 3/4 of the rural towns, close to the Finfinne city, close to Sululta, in the range in these places. They have already occupied the local administration, and they have even begun to give public services such as education, at least teaching languages and so on and so forth. Just yesterday, we have seen a footage where a young soldier, a liberation soldier, having his gun on his shoulder while also teaching basic alphabets to kids. And that's because in those areas for a long time now, there is no school service, there is no education at all. So kids are mostly at home when they are not being killed or raped. So they bring them together in a school setting or in a cave, and they give them some lectures in relation to the Oromo alphabets and so on and so forth. So the war in Oromia has had extraordinary repercussion. Oromia has seen brutalities that it has never seen in 150 years of its history in the empire. People have been burned alive. Towns have been razed. Individuals, famous and not so famous, have been targeted for political assassination. And there was a spectacle of public execution in Dambidolo. A young man of 17 named Emmanuel Wendimu was publicly executed extrajudicially in a brutal manner after having run around the city with a gun on his neck, a pistol on his neck, saying, "You guys should learn from me. I have been a supporter of Oromo Liberation Army, and if you support the Oromo Liberation Army, this is going to be what happens to you." And they were basically showing an example of what happens to them if they support the Oromo Liberation Army. And after they made him tour the city, saying what they tell him to say to the public, then they brought him to a public square, in front of the entire public of the city, and his mom and dad, his brother, his family, and executed him there. And when he fell down, they shot him point blank and pushed him to off the stage where they executed him. That footage was circulated around, and it was meant to intimidate and terrorize the Oromo youth in particular. And it was meant to intimidate and terrorize the Dambidolo public, which has been historically the base, the social base, if you like, of the Oromo Liberation Front. And so those people must be silenced according to the regime. And those kinds of atrocities have happened. Weaponizing rape, weaponizing famine has been seen. And this is not us, this is not what we say. It has been documented again and again, although only partially, by international human rights organizations. And now the recent thing we are looking at is the ethnic cleansing that the Amhara Special Forces under Abiy Ahmed have started in Benishangul Gumuz zone. As you all know, that there are a couple, not just a couple, quite a swath of land that was inhabited by Oromos in those areas, and they are indigenous people. But when the redrawing of the map happened in 1995, some of them were trapped in Benishangul Gumuz region, and now the Amhara irredentists who have a claim in Benishangul Gumuz, they have gone there, and after going there, they are trying to eliminate the Oromo from there. And we have now about 200,000 displaced persons, not just from Benishangul Gumuz, Matakkala area, etc., but also from the border areas between Amhara and Oromia region. And this has happened because of Abiy Ahmed's dream and commitment to the Ethio-Amhara elite that he will restore Ethiopia to its olden days glory. He will do so by saving Ethiopia from Oromos. And that was the project that led to this war. And since 2020, this has been compounded further by the onslaught that started on in Tigray. There is a war raging in Tigray, and the global public is more familiar with this war. And because of the alliance between the Oromo Liberation Army and the Tigrayan Defense Forces, Abiy Ahmed seems to be all the more raging to reinforce the war effort in Oromia. And this is where we are at this point in time.
Yeah, you have said it. Thank you so very much. You have said it all. When Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed assumed office, he suddenly came into the power and has no roadmap how to rule the country. And he got the roadmap from the Gimbal Sabat political party. And he tried to bring the old Ethiopian unitary system. To go there, so he has to do all the odd and some inhuman actions just to blame the federal system. So, as an example, recently you already mentioned, and in Matakkal zone, the Ethiopian security forces and the Amara militia and its use wing part called Fano have burned a young man alive in a broad daylight, and recently they abducted 13 Oromos,
yes,
and about 12 Tagarus, the Tigray youths and civilians who have a clearance from the prison. And in addition to that, about a week ago, they beheaded Miss Birhani Raggasa, a mother of 6.
Yeah.
What is your analysis on this point, Dr. Tsaggaye, before we jump to the next point?
Yeah, as I said, this war is not just another war, you know. Conflicts do happen, and nations fight wars. Political groups have military confrontations. But what makes this very distinct, and what is actually so much causing an indignation to the international community's conscience, is the kind of brutality that is happening. First of all, the ethnic profiling that goes along with this war, and the ethnic cleansing attempts that they actually want to achieve. The second thing is the kind of cruelty that they show when they do commit those atrocities. It's not just that they commit atrocities, but the way they do it, and the way they do that with an intent to terrorize the entire public and to show supremacy, is more like what happened in the United States during the lynching of Black bodies. And you see political assassination, okay, Hachalu Hundessa is an example, and the Chief of Staff's assassination is another example, and the manager of the Nile Dam project is another example. We have seen all sorts of political assassinations. There was an attempt on the life of Jawar Mohammed, another prominent political activist, who also is now a member, part of the leadership team of the Oromo Federalist Congress. There has been attempts to completely push the Oromo political leaders out of the political space, and as a consequence, almost all of them have been in prison until very recently, when Jawar and a couple of his friends have been released. But underneath that, there is another message they want to send, a message of cruelty, a message of unspeakable horror that they wanted to send to the Oromo public. And this has been seen by weaponization of rape, raping children, women, and raping male children, which is very unusual in Ethiopia in general, burning huts while people are in it, households completely razed down, and this has never happened. And drones going to attack harvests, it's very strange. Drones are used to attack not just family households, but also harvests on the field. You see people beheading a pregnant woman, 7 months pregnant, Brani Adebrani. You see a person in Ataye in Shoarobit during the crisis in Wollo. You see the Amhara Special Forces and the Fano basically pulling out a sick person who was in the ambulance and chopping him down to death. They chopped him literally with knives, pulling him out of the ambulance. In Benishangul Gumuz, in Asosa, they plucked a guy, a Berta person, I think, a Gumuz or a Berta person, from a taxi, and then they dragged him around the city and killed him. And at various spots, they kill Oromos and the other peoples of Ethiopia in general with extraordinary cruelty, and they make messages. Just last week, when they were burning a human being alive in Mataka, in the west, in Benishangul Gumuz region.
Gumba district.
Yes. It is more than even what they do. It is what they say. That's very, very, very disappointing, to say the least. What they say is, "Oh, do we have bread? Do you have injera? Which one is better? It would have been great to eat this roasted body. To eat this roasted body with bread or with injera." That was the injera being the Ethiopian bread, and that was the way they are actually feeling about their cruelty. They go on taking selfies when all these things are happening, and we get the video footages from the pockets of some of these soldiers after they are either taken as captive as war prisoners or after they have been killed in the war front. And this is what is extraordinary. They record these things. In Tigray, when they were raping women, at some point they were saying, "We are purifying," gang raping a woman, "purifying your blood. We're trying to purify your blood." This is an unspeakable crime. And this is a crime that has no name, not even in the international humanitarian law, international criminal law. These are crimes that have no names yet. And this is the brutality that we are living with in the 21st century. And this is one of the unheard stories of horror that the world could not take up because of the preeminence of the Tigrayan conflict and the news coverage now moving away even from Tigray to the war in Ukraine. So it's a very unspeakable atrocity that is happening. And some of them, the ones committed in 2019, 2020, have been documented by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. And all sorts of crimes have happened in Tigray. It's unspeakable what happened in Tigray. The proportion is far larger than the one that has happened in Oromia. But this will be the defining character of Abiy Ahmed. This will be Abiy Ahmed's legacy.
Yeah, all the crimes took place in Ethiopia, but all the crimes were not reported. There are tens of thousands of crimes, untold crimes, and then not reported. The internet is blocked, no telephone conversation, nothing. That's the reason they are blocking the communication from the international community.
Yeah.
There are reports of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and other forms of atrocities. The international community's response has been far from significant. Recently, the US Congress is poised to pass the law that will impose sanctions on the Ethiopian government officials. What do you make of that?
Well, there has been a lot of reports of war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, ethnic cleansing, and so on and so forth. And by the way, this war Abiy launched is orchestrated with the assistance, with the active collaboration, cooperation, active involvement of the Eritrean forces. To that extent, the war has been internationalized already, because Abiy Ahmed invited Eritrea into this war, and he launched this war with their support in Tigray. Their presence has been long felt in Oromia. Before even the war in Tigray has started, they had camps. The Eritrean security forces had camps, 3 camps in Finfinne alone, in the capital city. They had been seen on the scene when the Oromo public was protesting the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa and the arrest of Oromo political leaders. They have been seen on the streets of Shashamene and Naqamt and Bati and Maki and Bishoftu and Adama. In all these places, the security forces have been seen. Reports, if our informants also have been saying that the actual persons who pulled the trigger to assassinate Hachalu Hundessa is a very prominent artist that is the voice of the generation. In fact, his songs were the soundtrack of the Oromo protest movement. The actual persons who actually pulled the trigger to assassinate him are reported to be Eritrean security personnel. And the Eritrean element has already internationalized the war. And then added to that is the enlistment of the United Arab Emirates drones. Now the Chinese drones, the Turkish drones, the Iranian drones have also been involved. And international actors have a lot of...
Dr. Tsaggaye, can I bring some point on here before, just on the Eritrean troops? Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed was denying the presence of the Eritrean troops in Ethiopia. He has deceived the international community, including the Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Yeah.
I remember back in December 2020, Mr. Guterres said that no proof of Eritrean troops in Ethiopia, while the Eritrean troops were committing crimes against humanity in Tigray. At that time, the Eritrean troops killed about 600 civilians in Aksum only.
That's true. I mean, the international community actually wasn't deceived by Abiy. They chose to be deceived by him. He is a darling of the West. He has been the darling of Antonio Guterres. Antonio Guterres in particular has, I think, Ethiopian-born staff around him, and the Ethiopian political class misinforms him. And he said he's very close with Abiy Ahmed. He said when the fact that the Eritrean forces have had a part in the atrocities that unfolded in Tigray, when he was given the report, he said, no, I have called and spoken to Abiy Ahmed several times, and he has told me clearly that there are no Eritrean soldiers involved in this. And to the Ethiopian public, at first, he said there were no Eritreans involved in the war. And later they said, because our military, the northern command of our military has been attacked on the border between Eritrea and Tigray, because our military is attacked, the Eritreans, to secure their territorial integrity, their border, they came in. It's not us who invited them, but because the army was attacked in their absence, in the absence of the border army, they just came in. And later in parliament, he sat down and his self-contradictions are just incredible. And he sat down to talk to the parliamentarians, as he said, at this difficult time, had it not been that we have the support of the Eritrean regime, we would have been undone. And when you hear that, you know that they know that Eritrean forces have been involved. And the international community simply chose to look away. They simply chose to look away. Because, Abiy Ahmed has been a Nobel Peace Prize because, according to the international community, he made peace with Isaias. In actual fact, until today, we don't know the content of the peace he has actually made. because the Ethiopia and Eritrea had a border conflict for a long time, and the ICJ has made a decision. And for implementation, Eritrea said immediately, without any precondition, give me the land and that will be over, it will be over. And the Ethiopian government said, yes, we are happy to give it back. But on the demarcation issue, we have to negotiate. And this is usually in all other countries, in all other disputes. When we actually go down on the ground and demarcate and delimit the border, we have to be very careful about dividing localities, churches, families, and farms, and so on and so forth. So we have to negotiate on this on a day-to-day basis. And that wasn't accepted by Isaias of Eritrea. And as a consequence, there was a stalled diplomatic confrontation there. And what happened now is there was no demarcation. There was no delimitation, no discussion about that at all. And we were told that they have made peace, and Isaias was in Addis, and Abiy was in Asmara, and that's it. And until today, the Ethiopian public doesn't know exactly what the content of that treaty, that agreement was. And in fact, from the very start, I was saying, as long as there was no delimitation and demarcation of the border, which was the point of divergence for a long time, there was no peace that was made. In fact, what the two had was a war pact, an agreement to wage war in collaboration against what Abiy Ahmed considers his opponents, mainly the Tigrayan groups and the Oromo groups. And that was what they had. And true to character, because they made that war pact, not peace, mind you. And it's very ironic that Abiy Ahmed was given a Nobel Peace Prize for making a war pact. And because of that, they went into all these wars together, and they internationalized the war. Now, the response of the international community, as you also indicated, was far from significant. The issues of Ethio-Eritrean aggression on Tigray has been discussed at the United Nations Security Council level for about 13 times. All the time, the argument was one that establishes the fact that Abiy Ahmed is absolutely guilty of the war and the war crimes and the crimes against humanity and the genocide that was being committed. The only reason the United Nations could not move concretely was because of the veto power that was used by China and Russia. And the only other exception is India, who voted in favor of Ethiopia all the time. So, partly owing to the dysfunctional nature of the United Nations system because of the veto system, and partly because of Antonio Guterres' deliberate covering for Abiy, the international system, as far as the UN goes, could not work. The African Union had a peace plan in which they designated the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, to try to mediate between these two forces. And of course, it came to nothing to date. And then the European Union had made several resolutions, very concrete, strong condemnation of the Ethiopian government's wars, a strong condemnation of the Eritrean involvement in the wars, a strong condemnation of the enlistment of international drones from UAE and other places, and a strong condemnation of all the atrocities that have happened in Ethiopia. However, the European Commission could not bring on board the other members of the NATO and the United Nations to take a military action to stop these people, let alone that, even to break the siege that encircled Tigray and has created a humanitarian crisis of exposing about 7 million people now to hunger. Now, on the other hand, the United States government recently, very recently, of course, the United States government has been very vocal about everything that was happening from the very start, In fact, 13 times when they went to the United Nations, the Ambassador Greenfield of the US, has been very eloquent and very aggressive in presenting the case of the Ethiopian case, and calling for a stronger action, a robust action. And now the US Congress, both the Senate and the House of People's Representatives, have issued a bill, have prepared a bill that, if passed, will bring a lot of sanctions on the Ethiopian government and its war associates, including Eritrea and the Amhara regional states.
You mean the US Congress bill HR 6600, right? And the
Yes.
Senate 3166.
Yes, 3199, the Senate, which just passed yesterday. It was passed in the Senate, and the HR 6600 will pass hopefully in the Congress, in the lower house, anytime from now. Once that happens, the two bills will be only reconciled, and they will bring them together and make them into a law which imposes an extraordinary measure of sanctions on the government of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and all the other political actors in the process. So in summary, the bills have very similar content, and they are very short legislations, about 12 articles. In all of them, what comes again and again, what comes out again and again are the sanctions, the similarity of sanctions. The sanctions include blocking of property of the political leaders that are engaged in war, atrocity crimes, and so on and so forth, freezing their assets. Number two, it's the visa process, banning visas for officials who are involved in war crimes, hate crimes, genocide, and hate speech, and so on and so forth. And also people who are involved in basically doing away with this peaceful measures to be taken, peaceful resolutions to be sought for the problem. Because there are, at least in Ethiopia, there are the Amhara regional states government, which do not want any peace plan, any political settlement. So they wanted to discourage those people, and they said, we will be doing a visa embargo on all these actors. So the second kind of sanction that was foreseen is, that's envisaged now in the bills, in the US bills, is about the visa visa freeze. And the third is denial of exports, especially exports of weapons, military weapons, and sale of them, transfer of them, loan of them. All of them are basically denied to the Ethiopian government, to the Eritrean government, and to the Amhara National Regional State government. Internationally, the United States vowed to pursue other partners such as the United Arab Emirates, China, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Sudan, all these actors which have some spoiler role in the region. They said, the American government said, we are going to pursue these groups and to identify and determine what kind of involvement they have in the war in Ethiopia, and try to put sanctions on them, both on multilateral settings and in their bilateral diplomatic engagement. They also pledged to freeze and suspend any development and trade assistance and partnership that Ethiopia gets from international financial institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. And the American government vowed to use its vote to influence those institutions to suspend all project funds, except those which go on for humanitarian purposes. And there is a host of other sanctions that are put in those legislations, and this might, in fact, bring some difference on the ground. But as that bill was considered last Thursday, when the Senate bill 3199 was about to be considered on the Senate floor, the Ethiopian government actually came up with a truce, which they called humanitarian truce. They said, we are going to do a ceasefire so that humanitarian aid can reach the Tigrayan region. However, until today, no aid has reached, no convoy has been sent with humanitarian aid. And in fact, what we see is a military convoy congregating on the border of Tigray. About 130 bus loads of soldiers, Ethiopian Defense Forces, have been transported to the border of Tigray around Kobo. And it looks like while they talk about truce, humanitarian truce, they are actually preparing for another round of war. And to make sure that this is going to happen, they sent the deputy chief of staff of Ethiopia to Asmara, which always is the one that orchestrates the war in Ethiopia. And they have mobilized their army, and the Amhara National Region of the state has also said they are ready to fight the TPLF until the end. And they are kind of preparing themselves in the House of People's Representatives in the Amhara region. The president was saying that we are now more than ready to bring the final solution to the problem of Ethiopia, which is the Tigrayan group. And at the same time, in Oromia, the Oromia National House of People's Representatives, Chafe Oromia, has vowed just last week, in 1 month from now, they will eliminate the Oromo Liberation Army. It looks like Ethiopia is in both directions. Ethiopia is actually trying to resume another round of war. The chief of staff has said already that there will be chapter 2, and chapter 2 is not going to attack only Tigray. Chapter 2 is going to attack the Oromo, the Command, and all other people who are resistant to us. And as a consequence, in fact, they have been attacking already through drones that are borrowed from Iran, areas such as Command and Ago, and in Amhara region alone, and the Wallo Oromo zone. And the Wallo Oromo, as you know, has been subjected to a humanitarian crisis that no one is speaking about at this point in time. Many of the towns have been razed down by fire, and many people have been killed, and the people have fled into the jungle. And now the local administration chases every single one of them, arrests them, and they ask them to point to another member of the OLA or a sympathizer of the OLA within their family. And if they don't cooperate, they take them out and execute them publicly. And Wollo, as a consequence, has become a very dangerous place. In fact, it has become a graveyard within the Amhara region. And this has been done by the Ethiopian Defense Forces, by the local administration, by the Amhara National Regional State Special Forces, and the FANO, and the local militia. And this is happening at this point in time. And now they are actually going to start a new offensive, both in Oromia and in Benishangul Gumuz and in Tigray. So that's where we are at this point.
Very worrisome. The future is. I'm very worried about the future of Ethiopia and its citizens. And according to the researchers at the Ghent University in Belgium, as many as 500,000 people have died from the war and the famine in Tigray only. Yeah. That excludes in Oromia and other parts of the country.
Yes.
And it is. I'm very worried for the country and the Horn of Africa in general.
Yes.
Do you think the bill of the House of Representatives of the U.S. Congress and the Senate will bring some change to the country and the plan of Abiy Ahmed's government?
Well, it all depends on what other alternatives, financial sources Abiy Ahmed will have. The bill is very robust. The bill obviously has terrified them already. They are 24/7. They are now trying to demonize the United States for preparing this bill, and they know that this is going to twist their arms, and they are going to face a lot of limits. There shall be no security and defense support as there used to be for a long time. As you remember, Ethiopia has been an ally of the West in their war against terrorism since 2001, and so there is a huge security support, security assistance, and defense assistance, and that will be suspended at this point in time. When that is suspended, when development aid is suspended, when loans are denied, when assets are frozen, obviously they will have no finance with which to continue the war. However, what if China extends some support? What if Russia extends some support? What if Iran extends some support? And what if the Gulf countries, the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi government, if they do extend some money to them, then with that money, they might continue to sustain the war for some time. However, the bill is also pointing in that direction, in making sure that those international actors are not going to support them. And America seems to have learned its lessons from what happened in Russia, when they have they imposed all sorts of sanctions on Putin. It has basically disabled his capability to sustain the war. And I think from that, they realized that for a poor country such as Ethiopia, this kinds of bill, if it is supported by the European Union, which it will, I think is going to do a lot of damage to the regime, and it is going to bring it to its knees. But this is a very strange regime. It's a foolhardy regime. As you know, secularism has long receded since Abiy Ahmed has come to power. Abiy Ahmed professes to be a Pentecostal evangelical Christian. That's why he also have this prosperity party driven from the theology of prosperity gospel preachers, and they have their own international supporters even in the United States Senate. They have supporters like famous the Van Hollen, for example, Senator Van Hollen, and a number of others in Maryland, in South Dakota, and so on and so forth, who go and pray for them. And in Colorado, we have Inhofe, Senator Inhofe, and all of these are from the conservative right-wing Christian, evangelical Christian circles in the United States, and they do support them, and they do pray with them. And in those prayers, you see a lot of foolhardiness that might emerge, In fact, the whole mission of Abiy Ahmed's political project has been propelled by what God has intimated to him about his leadership as a messianic one, as one that saves Ethiopia from its others. And as a consequence, irrespective of what is now coming to be imposed upon him as a sanction, Abiy, being a very foolhardy person, and also knowing that he has no exit, because if he stops now, obviously he will be accountable for all the atrocities. And the US bill makes it clear that all those persons who are involved in the perpetration of all those crimes, be it leaders or foot soldiers, all of them shall be accountable. And if they are not accountable, the sanctions will be imposed. This means then, if they stop the war and retreat, they will be accountable. If they pursue and prosecute the war, then, well, there will be more deaths, more violence, more complications, more instability in the region. But in the end, they will be accountable. So
that's a guy. I'm sorry for my interference over here, and I'm really afraid that whether the international community is aware of what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is doing. Prime Minister Abiy talks about peace on TV screen to the international community and plans how to stay. He works for himself and plan how to stay on power at the expense of the citizen. And behind closed door, he planned war. And I don't think the international community is aware of this.
Well, that's part of the problem, because Abiy says something and does another, and let alone the international community to the Ethiopian public. Just last week, he said, because the Tigrayan peoples are our own peoples, we need to take care of them. And that's why we need to have a humanitarian aid extended to them. And that's why we are making this truce, this ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire. But then what we see is a build-up toward another war, another phase of the war. And so Abiy has always been very ambiguous in what he says. And he always presents himself as this dove who preaches peace, who preaches forgiveness, who preaches reconciliation and coming together in the form of Meddemer, which is the ideology, he says, of and the political program of his political party. And in all of those, what you see is about this Pentecostal fluff, forgiveness, reconciliation, peace, and brotherhood, and on and on. But at the same time, what he actually does is division, hate speech and hate propaganda, genocide, war, and instability. And this he does because he wants to stay in power. And he could have stayed in power without creating all this chaos. But because he has a predetermined aim to eliminate what he considers to be the enemies of Ethiopia, which is forces of diversity, such as the Oromo and the others of Ethiopia, and now the Tigrayans, and so on. Because he has this predetermined vision of doing away with all ethno-nationalist forces from Ethiopia to make Ethiopia glorious again. Because he is guided by this mission, he had to create wars. Otherwise, he was one of the well-received leaders in the country's history when he started. And he didn't have to do any war in order to be supported. People have given him a benefit of the doubt. People have, even the skeptics such as myself, have said, okay, let's give him a breathing space. But many people have actually been loading him. And that was even exaggerated further by his winning the Nobel Peace Prize, which of course is always political, more political and not substantive. And he didn't have to do all these things, but he did because he had a predetermined mission to eliminate Ethiopia's others and re-establish the imperial kind of Ethiopia, the imperial version of Ethiopia, and that basically has tried to displace and dispossess the other peoples of Ethiopia, including the Oromos. And the international community misses this. The international community wants to make sure that the Ethiopia, as a strategic ally of the West, remains one, undivided and stable. And one of the reasons they tolerate any undemocratic practice in the Horn of Africa is because Ethiopia should stay one, undivided and stable. And it's very interesting that even in the US bill that I just discussed a while ago, the S3199 and HR 6600, in both of them, there's policy statement at the very beginning in Article 3s and Article 2s. The policy statement they have says that we want to help bring about a peaceful, democratic, and unified Ethiopia. Why? It's only a unified Ethiopia that can protect their strategic interest, their strategic geopolitical interest in the Horn of Africa. And of course, whether Ethiopia should remain united or not is an internal matter altogether, and it's going to be dependent on the will of the constituent units, and that's where it goes. In my view, the end game will be that this war will end in defeating and disarming Abiy Ahmed.
But Dr. Tsaggai, I'm sorry for my interruption. And recently I read an article which says since the war in Ethiopia began, terrorism in the Horn of Africa has increased by 70%.
Yes.
And next year or next year or two, we don't know, it might be 34% and then multiply by itself and go back to very dangerous area.
Absolutely.
So they have to take action. He always promises, as you have said earlier, he preaches peace and plans for war. And he don't implement what he says. So, and last week, as an example, the regime, his administration declared a humanitarian truce in Tigray, but it has been going for a week now. No action has been taken, and then no open access to the people in need of humanitarian aid. It appears that he's preparing for the major military action, as you have said, both in Tigray and the Oromia state.
Yeah.
What's your view on these points, Dr. Tsaggaye?
Well, he as I said, he talks about peace, and in fact now he has become so predictable that when he comes out to the media to talk about peace, you have to brace yourself for a war. When he talks about brotherhood, you have to brace yourself for assassination. That's what you see. When he invites someone to the palace and talks to him.
In other words, you're saying that takes the opposite.
Absolutely.
Okay, got it.
In fact, many people talk in Finland now. If he invites you to the palace to talk to you about something, then beware. When you come out, you might be a subject of assassination. And that's what happened to Achalu. That's what they tried to do to Jawar. And that's what they have done to Colonel Gammachu Ayyaana, who was imprisoned and who is still in jail, and on and on. If you remember, Gammachu Ayyaana was Colonel Gammachu Ayyaana, former OLF fighter, who has been in Ethiopia, was arrested for about a year or so. He was detained, and then he was released after Abiy called him to his palace and made him promise some stuff, and he released him. And a few months later, he was again taken back for no charge so far. For no charge. Nobody knows even the prison where he is detained in. So whenever Abiy talks about brotherhood,
he was freed 6 times. The court,
yes.
the justice system freed 6 times, but the administration of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed refused to release him.
Absolutely. In fact, they took him from normal prisons into the headquarters of the federal police, and at some point we didn't know exactly where he was. The family didn't know where he is actually detained, and this is how we live. And not just him, a number of our OLF political leaders, the central committee leaders, and so on. But Teorgesa has been suffering in prison for some time. It just been released last time on medical grounds. Lammi Benya, Michael Borana, Kenneth Ayyaana, all these people, Abdi Raggasa, all these people have been in prison, and they have been told by the prosecutor that he has no case against them, and he dropped the charges, and yet the prison still detains them, and the regime is not interested in letting them go. So this has been the way it is, and if Abiy invites you to his palace, 2 things will happen. Either he asks you to support him and give you some, dole out some benefits, special privilege, like land, house, and so on and so forth, or money, or you might be targeted for assassination. You never know. So he speaks about peace, he wages war. And that is very deceptive to the international community. In Ethiopia now, people don't even care about what he says, because whatever he says, what he does is something else, and nobody even listens to him at all. They just watch for what is happening on the ground. So the recent developments in relation to Oromia is that they are declaring war in the regional in the regional House of Representatives. The Amhara region is declaring war on Tigray in the regional House of Representatives. Abiy Ahmed has been waging war, in fact, calling for support from other regions, Prosperity Party branches, to wage war on Oromia. And at the same time, they talk about truce. But the idea of truce came on Thursday because they were afraid that the US Senate bill will be discussed on the floor. And at that time, in order to stay the discussion on the bill, they had to pretend like they are for peace. And in fact, one of the senators who actually postponed the consideration of the bill on the Senate floor on Thursday was told that we have to give Abiy Ahmed some time. And he actually told the same to the Senate and says, Abiy needs some time, give him some time. And on the same date, when the bill was marked and it was not, the discussion for it was discussed, the discussion on it was postponed for Tuesday, yesterday, he actually came up with the idea of the truce. He was trying to buy time. He was trying to have some breathing space to prepare for the war. And he wanted to calm down the US Senate so that they would say, oh, okay, there seems to be a peace effort right now. But no, to the Ethiopian public, what they told them was, although we have declared a ceasefire, a humanitarian ceasefire, because the Tigrayan army is now still present in the Amhara region, in the territories of Afar region, we are not going to distribute aid to the Tigrayan population. It's very interesting. You can't have any precondition for a humanitarian aid. If you made a humanitarian truce, you don't talk about territory occupied, because that is dealt with through political settlement, through comprehensive political settlement, by going back to the status quo ante. And that's not what he's doing. He said he made truce for humanitarian purposes, and then he tells you that unless these territories are ceded back to him, he's not going to allow the access to humanitarian aid. And that's really crazy. And he was trying to find an excuse. Nevertheless, the attempt to stop somehow, to delay the Senate bill has come to nothing now, because on Tuesday, yesterday, they deliberated upon it and they passed it. And that was a huge gain for anyone who resists Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia, including the Oromo. And at this point in time, I think what is happening is, and many people ask, especially from the international community side, many people ask me, what is the future like? What is the end game? What is the Oromo plan?